All right, now on this ring, we see that we have this the bezel that's fitted over the stone, and we have this decorative twisted wire, which we call buttress. So this is the buttress. Okay, now in architectural terms, in the medieval and the Renaissance era, they used buttresses to support buildings. And so this you could say that this buttress supports the bezel, which keeps the stone in there. So what we're going to do is now we're going to go through almost those same steps for the bezel, sizing it around the stone. Now, the catch is we sized the bezel around the stone perfectly. We cannot size the buttress around the stone because there is now a piece of metal in between. Right? We have we have the bezel, so we have to form this buttress around the bezel and the stone. So what we'll do is like we did before, we'll take the stone, and I just kind of put it in my thumb like this, and I just with the bezel, kind of me holding this stone in between, I just wrap it around, and I just kind of bend it around like that. Okay. Now, if I lay it down, there is gapping right here. So I need to be aware of that. But it fits. This is the general size. So what I'm going to do, knowing that there's gapping, I'm going to take my marker and I am going to press my my buttress as close as I can, and then I'm going to mark it with the marker. I'm going to put a mark right here, and then I'm going to put a mark right there. And those are my cut lines. This is where I'm going to cut the buttress. Okay, so I'm going to take my stone and I'm going to take my bezel and put it back on the leash so I don't lose it. Now this is the part that students will lose a lot of metal because they use the flush cutters and the metal goes flying. So you'll use the flush cutters so that this edge is on the edge you want to keep. You put it on the line on one of them. And what I like to do is I like to cover my hand, cut it, and then there it is. So I have it there. And then I do the same thing on the other side. Take it, cut it, and it's stuck in my hand, and it looks great. And I'll take these small pieces and I will put them in the bone box. Now, this should fit more or less on the stone. So let's go get our stone and bezel again. We'll put it down, and we see that you know what? It's a little bit too big. It's a little bit too big, but we haven't soldered it yet, so that's fine. So what we're going to do, we're going to just take that small piece, and we're going to just cut a little bit off of the buttress. And we'll put that piece in the bone box. And now we'll test it out again. It's kind of trial and error. And as we're doing this, you want to make sure that that buttress, that the bezel is staying the shape of the stone. So I'll take the bezel and buttress. I make sure that these edges are pushed tight, and I push these sides together, and it looks like it fits. It may be a little small, but once again, with the bezel, similar to the bezel, if it's too small, that's okay, because we can make it bigger. If it's too big, we need to cut it down. Now, if you look closely at this buttress, you'll see that it's a little angled, and we don't want that. So what you'll do is you'll get the file, and you can open this up, and you'll get like a red file, and you'll just file these edges square. You don't need to file a lot, you're just filing just a little bit. And once again, the files work best on the push. You don't pull the files, you push them. Okay, so there we go. There is the buttress ready to go, and now we can solder the buttress since we know that it will fit around the bezel and the stone. All right, now that we set this the buttress is the correct size, we'll dip it in the boric acid and we'll put it on the charcoal block. Now notice I made sure that those ends lined up perfectly already. Okay, so we have that, and we'll just lightly burn off the boric acid, and we'll take the flux and we'll put some flux just right over that seam. Now, just like in the other soldering the silver band, what we'll do is we are going to actually put a small piece of solder on the flat surface of the charcoal block. If it's not flat, then adjust it so it does, and so that the buttress is touching, the buttress seam is touching the solder. So if you see the buttress, the seam of the buttress is right, the solder is right under that. And if you need to, you can adjust it a little bit, just like that. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna heat the top, and the solder will flow up into that seam. And once again, we're using the small torch, So I start heating it up generally, and then I start bringing in my torch until the solder flows, just like that. And once again, remember, the solder flows where the heat is. So if the heat is on the top, above the seam, then it'll flow up. So if you look at that, it's soldered perfectly, almost seamless, which that's what it should do. And then we'll put it in the water and move on. Now that I have my bezel, my stone, my bezel, and my buttress ready to go, once again, the stone fits from the top into the bezel, and it should fit easily through. Almost, possibly even just a little bit too easy, which will be fine. You don't want to have to force the stone through it. And now we'll see about the buttress. Now the buttress should fit perfectly. Now if it doesn't, once again, that's not the end of the world. So it doesn't fit. I tried to put it on, it doesn't fit. It should almost drop perfectly down over it. It doesn't, so I'm going to take my mandrel, my oval mandrel, and I'm going to cinch it down, and I'm just going to lightly hit it. Now before, I rolled it on a piece of steel. You don't want to do that because this is not flat metal. This is a little bit, this is rounded. So I'm just going to lightly hit it. Okay, now you can also see that it's not straight. It's not straight up and down. There's a little bit of a wave to it. And to fix that, to flatten it, what you can do is you can take a piece of steel. You can put this, you can put the buttress on it, and you can hit it. But to make sure that you don't lose your buttress, I like to put a piece of tape down over it, and that way when I hit it, it stays steady And now I know that it's nice and flat. So I'll go back and I'll check it again. So it should, it almost goes. It is almost there. I'm gonna just try it again. Oh, just slightly not. And that's fine. You want it snug, so you want to take your time and do this properly. So I'll take my bezel and I'll take it back over the mandrel, and I'm lightly hitting it. You don't want to make it too big. If for some reason you make this too big on the mandrel and it's gappy, then you will need to cut the bezel and resolder. So I'll take it. Oh man, that fits like a glove. That is, I mean, it's holding itself to the bezel while at the same time allowing the stone to easily sit through, drop through. Now if I zoom in and I show you, this is a really good setting in that, we have, it's flat around the edges. If you see, if I flip this over, it should lay flat with the bezel. There should be almost zero gap. You want this to be at the same level as the bezel, the bottom of the bezel. And there's almost zero gap. Each of these knobs is touching the bezel, which is perfect. If it doesn't, you need to reform it. You need to use the mandrel. You need to adjust the bezel so that it fits, and then the stone fits perfectly in there. So if I were you, you take this at this point, I would take my finger and I would make sure that it's pushed down all the way so that there's no gap right around the base of this. But that is a perfect fit. At this point, your stone should fit from the top down into the buttress, or into the bezel, and it should fit pretty easily. And now we are ready to solder this bezel and the buttress to the base plate.